Welcome to How to Build a Nonprofit, the only podcast dedicated to deep dive interviews with nonprofit founders about their journey, their why, board development, fundraising, staffing, leadership, and making a big impact. We ask courageous and visionary founders about their struggles and successes and everything in between. As a listener, all you have to do is learn and appreciate. I'm your host, Jordan Theory, and this is How to Build a Nonprofit. In this episode, I interview Stacey Borden, founder and executive director at New Beginnings Reentry Services. Stacey is truly a special person. She is inspiring, she is genuine, she is compassionate, and she is brilliant. Our conversation starts with her childhood, her neighborhood, and her family, all of which play a critical role in the origin story of her organization. We then move to her transformation and healing process and what inspired the vision for the work she would begin after her last period of incarceration. With the help and encouragement of a key mentor, she's able to found her organization, and when she gets a chance to make her first big ask, let's just say she makes it look easy. All of this and more in today's episode, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. We're live, Stacey. Thank you so much. I'm excited to delve in with you today, hear more about your story. You know, you grew up in Roxbury, Dorchester. I'm actually wondering if you can just start by telling us what Roxbury and Dorchester was like growing up.
Well, as a child, it was magical, right? I mean, you don't know that you're in poverty or struggles. I'm the 11th child of 12. And so, I had older brothers and sisters that were, smart. Some went to college, some were in the street, older brothers that were hustling, And all I can remember is in the 70s, we were sedated. You just all of a sudden seeing people that were sharp, thriving, making things happen. My parents were, struggling, but we didn't know that as a child.
Right.
But all of a sudden in the 70s, I want to say maybe 72, I might have been as early as 9, 10, that I seen everybody sleep. The heroin epidemic came through. And it was probably already there, but it had progressed. And so, a lot of racism just came out of the blue, and then it was almost like doomsday. I started realizing I wasn't adjusting well in school. I come from childhood sexual trauma, so I kind of checked out and I drifted the majority of my life up until I was 47. I got into drugs and street life as early as 11 and 12, and Boston Public Schools really didn't offer us much, as most schools across the country, So I fell into that era and just ended up in and out of prison systems all the way till I was 47 years old. 30 years of my life, in and out, in and out, in and out. It was almost normalized. I was just having that conversation with my partner earlier about coming from the project. I'm an OP girl, Orchard Park. I didn't live in Orchard Park, but I lived right on the corner. And Orchard Park is the project that our famous New Edition group grew up in, right?
Okay.
So I went
Bobby
to
Brown
school.
in there.
That's right. I went to school with Tommy Brown, Bobby's older brother. I went to school with his sisters. I went to school in the Orchard Park. But I also had an older sister who was dating an older man. I mean, and they were 16, 17. And I would always stay at her boyfriend's mom's house. That was my babysitter. And so I kind of grew up in OP. And, those schools those projects were designed just like the prison system. I mean, it was familiar to come from a project with the little bathrooms, with the little dinky apartments and the bedrooms, and even our schools, the school system, the school buildings were just brick and steel, just like a prison. So it was kind of familiar. I say easy for me to just be in a prison environment because it was just like the environment I grew up in. And, it wasn't until 2008 that the Sisters in Prison kind of enlightened me of what I was doing to myself, my family, and community. And then hearing their stories. Camaraderie that we built, and the storytelling, and the underlying trauma of sexual and domestic violence that kept us all. 97% of women incarcerated come from sexual and domestic violence, and we act out. So we never get to address our trauma. Of course, we know the prison environment doesn't address trauma. It's designed for punishment, not rehabilitation. And so that was my life. That's my life story.
Before we kind of get into your, founding of New Beginnings, I kind of want to stay in that backstory a little bit more because it's such a huge part of your story and of the organization. So, can you tell me a little bit about your parents? Because I understand that your father ended up sort of working on the other side of that equation, and was a huge part of your transformation.
Yeah, that is true. My parents were amazing. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they had 13 babies, one crib death. And, you're talking about a mom, a Black woman who, her parents came from Jamaica. Her mother was Jamaican. Her father was um, mixed. Family was from Toronto. Mother was white from Toronto or from England to Toronto. We don't know kind of where his dad was from. He was also mixed Indian. And so my mom was really a strong Black woman who decided to stay in Roxbury. She just wasn't willing to go outside of her culture and met my dad. They met as early as 18. And my father desperately wanted to be in the Army and do something different because his educators was telling him that he couldn't be an artist. My dad loved to
Okay.
paint. He was an artist.
Wow.
And so they told him, racism told him that he should go be an auto mechanic, which he did. But that diminished him as a Black man, and that brought in alcoholism. My
Okay.
father became an alcoholic. And for a good 30 years of his life of trying to be stable, raising a family, kept drinking until the 70s. He kind of got an honorable discharge out of the service and then went right into building cars, doing auto mechanic work until 72. He poured the liquor down the drain and checked himself into detox. And once he did that, he went to school, got a master's at Antioch University, which is now Cambridge College, and then went to Rutgers College in New Jersey on the weekends for his license in drug abuse counseling,
Wow.
and opened up Roxbury Detox in 1978, which is now one of the biggest community centers in the country for drug addiction and HIV.
Wow.
Well, back in 82, he was told that he had to be a director. He couldn't continue to stay in the basement and do group therapy. And his anger was, I'm a counselor. I have to help people overcome the challenge. He wasn't so much wanting or felt the need to direct because he had so many alcoholics coming to him and they were really recovering. And he thought it was best at that era. I'm sure there wasn't enough funding to keep staff going, right?
Yeah.
And so needless to say, it closed and then they picked it up and it became Epidemic Community Health Center over the years. Well, then Daddy went into the criminal legal system as a court officer because he felt myself and two older brothers were in and out of the system, and he thought he could make a difference because, when you're in court, you have cages in the back of the courtrooms, and he wanted to make sure that we were treated, not just his children, but people were treated with honor and dignity. So Daddy stayed in the courtroom a good 20 years before he retired.
He was a court officer, right?
He was a superior court officer.
And his decision to transition from being a counselor uh, to being a court officer was driven by a desire to have an impact,
That's right.
right?
From his own,
And his own,
impact, from his own lived experience. I
right?
don't know if he understood that then. I think that he was thinking about his children, of how he can be impactful to for his children. I mean, Daddy would bust in with his court uniform on and tell the judge, like, "This is my child, Your Honor." So
Wow,
the
really?
judges would be like, "George, this is a conflict of interest." And a few judges would step down and
Wow.
recuse themselves.
Yeah.
And other judges were like, "Bring your daughter in courtroom 702, George. We'll get her into treatment." But the treatment that we were having wasn't treatment for us. It was more treatment for people that weren't of color. I couldn't relate to that type of treatment. You know, they send us outside of our community, you know what I mean? And so I just couldn't get it. And I ended up backing again. And then eventually I started trying to do my transgressions of check writing, credit card fraud, stealing outside of Boston. So I didn't have to embarrass my dad, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
But he still showed up. He'd show up in Malden, he'd show up in Framingham, you know. It was a struggle until again, late 2000s is when I woke up. I was enlightened and I was like, what am I doing to my parents? What am I doing to my community? What am I doing to myself? And it was a reflection of the sisters that were serving long-term sentences and most likely natural sentences, natural life sentences. That I just couldn't process that that's what we're doing to Black girls. All of us, there was so many more Black women in there than white women. And I was like, this is unacceptable. I had to literally tell my parents, let me go. I'm gonna get it together. I'm gonna do the right thing, y'all. Just don't worry. Let me do my thing. I mean, it was an accumulation of the women in there. It was an accumulation of my dad saying I can't do it anymore. It was an accumulation of one judge that humanized me in court, all in the year of 2008.
How did that judge humanize you in the court? Can you just kind of describe what that means in the context of the court system and how folks are often treated?
You know, so I got arrested again 2006, the end of 2006, beginning of 2007. And I had like 15 warrants all over Massachusetts for credit card fraud, you know, check writing, uttering forgery. And I ended up being indicted in a few of the counties that had the warrants. In one county, Norfolk County, I live in Suffolk County. I went to Norfolk County in district court, and Judge Coffey, tall white male with a white patch on his head, leaned over the bench. I'm standing there with cuffs on. I have a public defender. There's a DA. And he leaned over the bench and said, Miss Borden, what's wrong with you? And I looked around like, who's he talking to? Nobody ever talked to me in court. And I couldn't process that in a moment. And he said, do you have a drug problem? Like, you got a mess on your hands. You have all these cases? What? And then he asked me, was I George Borden's daughter?
He knew your dad.
My dad from the years my dad had given as service in the court. And I just started bawling my eyes out. And then Jordan, my brain became active. What I mean by that is he asked me again, what do you need? What do you need to do? What is it that you want? And my brain just started saying, oh my God, you better tell him before you get 10 years. And then my other brain was like, you better not tell that white man nothing. He's not going to help you. They never help you. Then my brain was like, just tell him and take your chance because you might go home. I just told him everything I'm telling you. I come from sexual trauma. I can't stop getting high. I don't know how to, manage my life. I don't even know the term. Mental illness, trauma. What does all that mean, Your Honor? I need some help. And so my brain was like, did you just really tell him you need help? First time I ever said that. And he said, well, what do you want to do today? I said, I want to go back to the prison. I want to go back. The women are helping me, Your Honor. And my brain was like, you dumb butt. You don't want to go back to
Right.
prison environment. And I said, Your Honor, I want to go to CRA. He said, what's the CRA? I said, Correctional Recovery Academy. I need some correction. I need some recovery and I need some education. And the women said I could get that help. They will help me. So by no means am I giving any credit to the prison industry. I needed to be back with them women because the first time in my life, in that moment, I understood that judge was giving me an opportunity to take accountability without him holding me accountable. So he said, well, how much time you need? I said, I need a 3 to 5. And my mind was like, girl, you're going to get 10.
Right.
You really want to do 3, 5 years? And he said, Miss Borden, you're in a district court. You can only get 2.5. And my eyes lit up. I was like, I don't want to go to the county jail. I can't live in that environment. It's too confined. And there was nothing to offer right in our own community. I've always advocated that we should not have a 2.5-year jail in our Black and brown community. So I knew I didn't want to go there. So he said, what if we send you off to Dedham Superior? I said, I'll take it. He sent me to Dedham Superior with a note to that judge. And miraculously, that judge read Judge Coffey's notes and said, we'll offer you a 3 to 5 today. If you're ready, we'll even give you credit for Middlesex County, which they didn't know. When counties hold you, they're obligated for credit. So he gave me credit for another county and gave me 9 months credit for sitting and
Time
waiting,
served. Uh-huh.
time served. And I went and I did my 3 years. It started 2008. And I went in there and I made my mind up. I came from a county transportation van, Jordan, that was so disrespectful. Meaning, you're cuffed to 9, 12, 15 women, shackled by the waist, handcuffed to other women, and shackled at the feet. Now, when I tell you that that's so disrespectful and degrading because you have pregnant women, you have women that are withdrawing from drugs and alcohol that are throwing up, you have women with mental illness that are stripping their clothes and not in their right state of mind. And I had to visualize all that. But not only that, I kind of felt like maybe this is what our ancestors felt like enslaved,
Mm-hmm. Right.
transported
It's so
from court to court,
dehumanizing,
from
you know.
state to state, from county to county. So dehumanizing that by the time I got to the state court and took the census, I came out in state transportation, only cuffs, still dehumanizing, but more humanizing than the county. And I got in that van and I said, wow. I had been able to be relating to the court officers much more than the county. And so I made in my mind that we're only in prison in our own head instead of the government continuing to incarcerate us a mile a minute. I'm going in here and I'm going in here as if this was college more than a prison.
I just want to kind of take note of a few important elements, I think, here that relate to your leadership and the founding of New Beginnings. One is making the decision to ask for help.
Yeah,
And that's a big step, and
yeah,
it's a really important step. And what I see is that you learned how powerful that can be, you know, your pursuit of what you want to achieve, and in this case, your own personal transformation and healing, just
yeah,
beginning that healing journey. And then I think the other thing is this self-doubt, you know, that we deal with because of how we've been conditioned and dehumanized through the court system and the school system and jobs,
right.
that it makes us so hesitant to really, you know, trust our instincts and trust others to not punish us for when we say what we need or
That's
when we're
right.
truthful about what we're experiencing. Right.
That's right.
So with that, can you just kind of tell us about, you know, after that day in court, what some of those major steps were on early on in your transformation journey?
You know, it's such a it was so magical. I have to say that being back in the prison just in that one day, it was almost like I had left for some time and came back because my brain just shifted. It shifted into I call what's a maturated state, I guess. And it was, you know, another part of what really kind of woke me up is the women, in particular, one young woman named Angie, who was a lifer, who I had seen come in 91 when I was there. You know, Jordan, I just assumed that all women and everybody just left and came back. I knew about natural life, but I didn't know about natural life. I didn't know that that literally meant never coming home. And so she took me by the yard that day and said, you know, Stacey, you keep coming in and out of here. That drug addiction, that trauma you're dealing with, you're going to do something and it's going to harm somebody. You're going to be in here like me. And I was like, what? And then she told me her story of her father being murdered when she was a little girl, her mother checking out, kind of becoming abusive, putting her in the hallway, you know, trying to navigate her too, coming from a project. She lived in Ruggles Projects and just didn't have the nurturing that she needed and deserved and all the trauma that was happening to her as a young woman in the street. And then she had two children, and her youngest daughter, her father was murdered. And I was like, so you
Jeez.
have your father was murdered, now your daughter's murdered. And then she had a boyfriend who was abusive that made her have an abortion and then kind of assaulted her that night after the abortion. And the next day they had a fight. She stabs him. She's out on $1,000 bail because he died. She wasn't charged with first-degree murder because she turned herself in. She was really apologetic. She was emotional. She couldn't process he died. And then a year later, while she was out on a $1,000 bail, a white judge says, "What is wrong with this girl? She comes from Ruggles. Why is she continuously crying? And why are we charging her with manslaughter?" In the spot, they charge her with first-degree murder. It's unconstitutional. And I
Absolutely.
didn't understand that until I got a job in the law library in the prison. Another woman had directed me up to BU to take some college courses. So here I am working in a law library, thinking about Angie's story, looking it up, figuring it out like, this is not right. Something happened. Something in the law says this can't be right. And so 2 years go by. Here I am ready to leave the prison. Another woman comes in my cell, Kimia, who also had a sexual assault, stabbed a brother with a butter knife. He dies. The DA in our county was white, tries to make her tell on other people because she's out there drugging, getting high, and tells her, "We're sorry that
Using
happened to
her.
you, but you're going to get a life sentence if you don't give us any information. Matter of fact, we'll offer you a 19 to 20. So all of that in my head is like, I'm getting out of this prison.
This
I'm
ain't
getting
right.
ready to fight for my sisters. I got to do something different and develop because this is not right. And so that was my shift. I had just tunnel vision. I'm going one way. I'm going to get out. I'm going to learn the law. I'm going to find some people to help me get them two sisters out of there and figure out what's going on with this prison system. And that's what I did. I came out. I went into Cambridge College. I said, I have to understand mental illness, trauma, law. How am I going to fight for them for justice? There ain't no justice in this stuff. And that was my trajectory.
So essentially, yeah. So essentially, it was really those experiences that birthed the idea for your organization.
That's right.
And so your healing journey, you recognize in this working with, supporting, being part of these programs and just in the community with the other sisters that were incarcerated with you and seeing the pattern of sexual trauma, domestic violence, and being used by the courts and by law enforcement as basically pawns, right? And being manipulated by that system. When you got out, right? I understand you first started in as a counselor, as a drug and alcohol counselor.
I got my master's in mental health counseling, and I went back and got my license in drug abuse counseling. I have to say, shout out to daddy, shout out to the universe that gives us this innate ability. When you really look at it, I started out to tell you that my dad went to Antioch, which changed to Cambridge College, right? I had no idea that I followed his footsteps to open up a program. That was my desire. Got my
That's so
master's like
beautiful.
dad, got my license in drug abuse like dad. My mom was a housewife, but had, a business because she had to feed 12 children. She had an at-home business with coupons and refunds. So I had my innate ability of I didn't go to school for an MBA. I had my mom, right? That strength of a Black woman. And so, I became a drug counselor. I worked for Gavin Foundation, which was a detox program that led into halfway houses. I worked with them for quite a while, and then I moved on to Victory Program, which was housing-based treatment programs, and I facilitated groups and ran a women's 14-bed program. And then I went further to a methadone clinic to learn how to bill, which was fast-paced. Fast-paced. You had to get in, you run groups, you're doing one-on-one counseling, you're billing for that service. And then I realized it was for-profit, and I didn't want to be like a prison industry for slave labor and then building off of
Right.
people for profit. I couldn't do it. And I said, it's time to make my mark. I'm going to develop a nonprofit and figure out what that means. How do you run a nonprofit? How do I get a house to get the women out of a prison environment? And, the universe kept showing up, kept connecting the dots, and brought me to an organization called Families for Justice as Healing that was training us. The founder, her name is Andrea James, who became my mentor, who is a national organizer that trained us in participatory defense organizing, which means we get to
Okay.
participate as
Yeah.
formerly incarcerated people in one's defense. So we started doing court support. We started really showing up and looking at, how do we build a space where people that were facing the criminal legal system or, coming out on parole, or how can we fight for clemency? How can we fight for justice for these individuals to have either no time or less time? It was really what the individual wanted. How do you want us to fight for your rights? Right. And so that started happening. And then I started saying, oh my God, we could go get Angie out. We could get Kimia out. We could get some of these brothers out that are wrongfully convicted or disproportionately sentenced. And all the while, my mentor, Andrea, was like, sis, I need you to go back to school. I need you to go to Boston College and learn business entrepreneur. You need to get that house because we don't have any place to place people when we get them out. Actually, her organization, the second organization she has is the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, which their mission is to shut jails down. They don't do reentry. They prefer to do no entry. So they do a lot of work in the community
It's
on
abolitionists.
policy. And, I'm just like, okay, sis, we have millions of people still in the prison system. So if you shut the jails down,
Right.
you do that and I'll keep them out and lessen recidivism. So that's my mission. How do I keep people out and lessen recidivism and allow them to be reincarnated, reinvented, or just in a healing sense of learning their own empowerment and leadership? And so that was our mission. And so, later in 2019 is I did a presentation at Boston College through my business entrepreneur class, and there were some wealthy people in the audience that at the end of my presentation said, we'll buy you the house. And in 2019, we acquired a free 5-bedroom property that we just got busy to open up this residential property, and we took off from there. So we
I
weren't
mean,
playing.
that's miraculous, and that's a big deal. So like, let's let's actually go back a little bit to that, because it's such a monumental investment in your organization and the dream that you had, the vision that you laid out. Tell us about, like, okay, you were at Boston College, you all had a chance to basically give a presentation on a community project that you
Yeah,
were working on,
yeah.
and basically there was potential investors or funders in the audience. Can you kind of just explain that to us and how you prepared and built up your confidence and your vision to articulate in a way that was so successful?
It's so beautiful. Another magical moment that Professor Giannari of Cambridge College, who is a corporate lawyer, designed this business entrepreneur class that said, let's bring in formerly incarcerated people to sit next to corporate students, right? Heard me speak prior about a lot of our legal system is full of corporate lawyers and corporate judges and, district attorneys who are really in this corporate capitalism that built this legal system to keep investments of our Black and brown people in mass incarceration. We know that history, right? My vision came
Yes, we do.
from coming out of prison, going to Cambridge College. I had a professor that did vision boards. And I said, wow, let me create a vision board of creating a reentry program and bringing that vision to the entrepreneur class. Professor Giannari allowed me in the class. And the first night was to really tell a vision. We watch TV all the time that tells a vision. So I kind of knew that information. Let me tell what my vision was. And
Okay.
through
Yeah.
that, one of the students was like, I want her, which was a young woman who was amazing, who paired with me and allowed me to every night. Professor Giannari had a business person to come in and talk about what budgets look like, talk about LLC, talk about profit to nonprofit, talk about, what is it that you're trying to do? Well, I didn't know about any of them. I just knew that I heard about nonprofits. I heard we could be non-taxable. I knew that we could understand solicitation. How do we solicit funds? What does Robert's rules look like? What does board of directors look? All of that. And my partner knew that information. And so I had already had my nonprofit 501c3 started, and I already had a brother out of Maryland, Leon Rock, who was my grant writer, who was teaching me along the way. And so it was a win-win.
Okay.
I had already been in college to know how to do presentations. That was a win. I had already built enough confidence. I wasn't no more gonna be hurting myself. I wasn't on any more drugs. I had to, through therapy, through raising my hand at Cambridge College saying, hey, I just came out of prison. That was a barrier, telling on myself. I mean, all of that in conjunction with me being ready to do a presentation 3 months later, because it was only a course. I had to be prepared. And all of the business people who were coming in through class every night was tricking me. You want to get a house, that's going to be real estate. Maybe you shouldn't go that route. Brooks Robinson, who was my partner, was like, nope, Stacey, we're staying with getting a house. You need a house to get the women to be able to come to, because if they're on parole, they can't go home because we know the barriers to Section 8. Families have Section 8. They can't go. Housing authorities don't let you come in if you have a record. So we knew all that. We were staying steady with what our focus was. And so at the end of the course, here we go with the presentation. I had my statistics right. I had my sentencing project, the Marshall Project that gives right statistics of women in incarceration that were 800% growing in the prison environment. We never talk about women. I had videos to show what happens with women. I have belonged to Owl Productions that writes plays and workshops on women. I had a video of us having a workshop talking about individual women's stories. And I had other videos, and then I just talked from there of who I am, where I came from, and what we wanted. We needed a house. And then we showed a budget of what we can do to hold ourselves sustainable. And we knew that it would take time to get there. But I did my presentation, and I went and sat down, and I said, I missed the mark because nobody asked me a question. But when I got home, Jordan, there was an email. I opened up my laptop, and I said, oh my God. A couple said, hey, we want to buy you. So we love your presentation. And I slammed the laptop down and was like, that can't be real. I don't want no house. What am I going to do with it? I panicked. What am I going to do with a house? And then I opened up the laptop and I responded. And her response was, ma'am, you talk more than my husband do. Do you want the house or not? When can we meet? And we met, and it was the best connection. They are the most gracious, generous, anonymous donors that I've ever met. And we found this house, and they paid for it cash, and they've let me be free with it ever since.
And
That's
it
just
was
how it
ultimately,
happened.
was it what, a $750,000
That's right.
donation?
That's right.
Wow.
Almost $1 million hit.
And almost $1 million. And how much had you raised before that to your nonprofit at that point?
I had raised probably $3,000-$4,000. We were doing fundraisers like collecting shoes or,
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
out there trying to do
Right.
group therapy and ask people for donations and, $3,000 or $4,000. And then we got that $750,000 donation of a house. And then
Wow.
we had to
Yeah.
raise $350,000 in 2 years to get it in code and compliances for the city, for us to go through the zoning to
course,
open up
okay.
as a residential reentry. We had to tear out windows to put egress doors in. We had to put in fire escapes. We had to put in sprinkler systems, a whole new fire alarm system. We had to put in, the system had to be handicap accessible for deaf or blind to be able to see or hear. Or, not hear. You had to, if you couldn't hear, you had to see lights.
Right.
Or, we had to put in a $30,000 wheelchair lift, because the property was high. You couldn't put a ramp in, So, it was it was a process.
Yeah. And so at this point, you were still working in another position, right? As a counselor or as a navigator? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Andrea James came in and was like the last year before we opened the program, before we got approved to zone, the zoning board had to approve us. My mentor came, was like, sis, quit the job. I got a job for you to oversee a grant that allows you some freedom to be able to do what you do with your construction people. And so she gave us the support. She gave me a year's salary to oversee a national grant that she had. And I had the opportunity to meet some national people, be supported by her. And then she gave us a grant to buy the furniture, for the bedding, for the office supplies. And then I got a grant. We got a community engagement resource or reinvestment grant from the city or from the state, which was $700,000 for us to start. And so we opened our doors.
Wow.
2022. It took us 2 years to get the construction in order. And my contract ended with Andrea that year. And at the same year, we won and freed Angie. And Angie and
Wow.
Kimya
Wow.
had made parole, and them two were the first two, the two who saved my life 15 years prior. Were
Yeah.
the two that walked in our program miraculously.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. And how did you get such a sizable grant from the city, being such a young, new organization without a history of fundraising?
Isn't that
What was
something?
your secret there?
We had a
Yeah.
great grant writer, Leon Rock, who knew
Mm.
how to write them state grants. And it just so happened that there was so many advocates out here to fight the state for community engagement, reinvestment, that
Right.
it was right. I think it was right after, or it was right after COVID. So there was a lot of state money. There was a lot of ARPA funds. They created the SERP, Community Engagement Reinvestment. It was the first time that Massachusetts had this type of reinvestment into small nonprofit organizations that also, it was restricted, but gave us 50% down. So they
Wow.
picked like 13 BIPOC organizations in the community to invest in. It was right on time.
So at what point were you able to start like paying yourself in this process and then start hiring your own team?
Yeah, that was the year. That was the year we were able to bring on a salary, we had 9, because we were 24 hours, we were 7 days a week because it was a residential. And we had parole, probation. Some of the court probation officers knew us and took a chance to allow people to come to our program. We had 10 beds. We got full the first year, 8 beds, and used that $700,000 wisely. And it was, it was good, but it wasn't good because it was only a 6-month grant. You had to spend that $700,000 in 6 months.
Wow.
Leon
That's a
and
short
I
time
was able
period.
to, we had to really hustle to get community grants, philanthropy grants, foundational grants that came all at once. It was Boston Foundation, Johnson Family Foundation, New Commonwealth Fund, which is a Black organization, Makiba, shout out to Makiba McQuarrie, who does amazing work with, making sure philanthropists keep their word with funding Black and brown communities.
Mhm.
And so we had some 50,000, 100,000 hand there. Cummins Foundation, which is an amazing organization that supports BIPOC communities as well. So we had $100,000 from them for 4 years. We had Boston Foundation from them for 2 years. We had Makiba that hit us with, I think, 6,000, all in that same year. So we managed.
Wow.
We
Wow.
managed, and it was tough. And that managed us for the next 3 years until things started slowing down with funding.
So you really jumped up to like over $1 million budget
That's right.
in the span of like a year or 2.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That was
How did
that was
you
kind of big.
Yeah, that's very big. That's very big. How did you manage that? A lot of responsibility, not only with the being, responsible with those funds, putting them in a secure place, spending them the right way, but then also starting to build a team and hire
Oh my God.
people.
I had
What were the challenging parts of that for you?
Yeah, no, I had a great background team. I had a great accountant team, Streamline Solutions out of Somerville. Shout out to Meredith and Lauren that were amazing, which really handled our bookkeeping, all of our taxes, all of our, QuickBooks, managing the money, telling me, because I'm not a numbers person, so you had to have a really good team with helping me understand budgeting. Again, having a good grant writer, Leon Rock, and
Mhm.
Meredith Smith and Lauren Cotton, which was the bookkeeper, that really kept me in alignment with how do we look at budgets? How do we manage? How do we do the reporting for these state grants and the reporting for philanthropists and foundation
Yeah.
money? How do we build donor base? How do we do fundraising? That's a knack. I'm still not good at the fundraising part, but I know how to ask for money. Definitely know how to ask for money because,
Yeah, I mean,
you got
you
to
seem to
stay
get a great
influenced.
start on that.
Right? And you have to make sure that your team who's doing the work is paid, and they understood, you got to make sure that you keep in alignment and keep it transparent that funding is not always available. When you're in a nonprofit
People are
world,
learning that now more than ever.
it takes time to build a nonprofit and to be sustainable. And we have a new grant writer now who is Jennifer Wells, who's amazing. She's keen on seeing these small pieces that are the uploads, the documents that are needed. She revises and edits my wording of all the questions. And so we've managed to get now another $1 million grant from the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services that came up for reentry. So, it's
Congratulations. That's
ongoing,
incredible.
right? And
Yeah,
that is for the next 2.5 years. And still staying with our Cummins Foundation, who refunds us, with Boston Foundation, who funded us again another 2 years. Our CERT
Yeah,
grant
yeah.
gave us another shot at another $100,000 that's going to renew again for 2026. And they believe in our work.
To kind of uplift the greater kind of point that I'm seeing here as well is the team that you built.
And
And it sounds like you really built a solid team of contractors to support you. I'm assuming your grant writer was a contractor and your accountant team.
yeah.
And so what were the other kind of key roles that you had on that team in those early stages of developing?
I have to say that the first set of team was amazing, right? I didn't have the skill set to supervise. I was always a counselor, and I was always adamant about hiring our formerly incarcerated individuals. But when you do that, you got to have the skill set to train and supervise.
And support them.
Right? And support. It was difficult because I still had my own behaviors jumping out, right? I still had stresses when you're trying to manage 24 hours, you're managing women with behavioral issues, you're dealing with yourself, still healing, you're dealing with accountant team, you're dealing with reporting, which you just said, like, it's not easy to show up. I got to show up and do reports and meet you too. I got to then most of the state and I hadn't gotten into the federal grants yet, but you have to meet with the grant writer, you have to meet with the TAs, the technical assistants that gives you these grants, that gives you support for data, that you got to make sure the reports are on point, and those reports aren't easy. And so the first go around didn't do well. I didn't do well. And so I couldn't do 24 hours. So I had to do a lot of layoffs. Then funding wasn't coming in good because you're doing all this and you're kind of forgetting. You got to do these reports.
About the
It
other
takes time.
stuff.
I can't meet with the grant writer. Then the grant writer was retiring and the accountant team was retiring. And then I ran for office thinking I could do all of it. And then that was a lot. And I was like, okay, I just know I'm burning myself out. So then I ran into a problem with parole officers, not the parole board.
Oh.
They really liked our work. It was the officers and the mindset that the officers continue to have, that they wanted urines, they want to report any arguments that happen, they want you to do a discharge. Listen, I wasn't willing to cooperate. And they said, you're not willing to cooperate. I said, I'm cooperating. I'm a professional. I'm a licensed clinician. What more cooperation you want? Well, why ain't you discharging these two women and had an argument? I said, well, they didn't fight. They bumped each other. We stopped it. Why do I have to discharge them for you to send them back? How will they learn how to learn de-escalation? How do they learn to regulate their emotions? How do they learn not to cause harm unless they're here? We know how to handle a disciplinary. We don't need you to do your disciplinary or putting them back in a cage. And so the word was, well, you're not practicing public safety. And I said, I'm not the police, dude. You are. We practice community safety.
Exactly.
So I
And
had
you
to make a
require
shift.
them. Yeah, sorry, you rely on them I mean, you basically have to work in some kind of positive relationship with them, because the residents or the people that you're serving are on parole,
Right.
and they're paying attention to the programs that they're going through, and they're saying, hey, like, your program isn't helping, or this person violated their parole, why aren't you discharging them and we're sending them back in prison? And you're saying
No,
that's not how it's going to work here.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we be different? I did everything the state required of me, and I'm licensed. And we have a whole transitional occupation certification saying we can occupy people. Why do we have to deal with your behavior the way that you are? Because they hadn't violated anything. They're doing everything
Right.
else right. They're going to school. They're in programs. They're doing their AA, NA. We can ally. We can communicate. We don't have to have any signature partnership to say you come in and do urines or discharge people. No. I'm no different than any other white organization, other than we're not going to allow you. I said to the parole officer, well, what if I took you in the bathroom and strip search you to pee? We've done that enough in a prison environment. We don't do that here. If that's your requirement, you could do it at your office. I'm not going to gripe about it. So they said they weren't sending us any more women. So I was like, phew. It's probably one of the hardest things I ever had to do, to run a residential program, even though we need it. I think I'm better off doing a day center. My dream was to do all these programs that I can't necessarily do with the interruptive systems. So now we transitioned, sold all the beds, and made every single room intentional for healing. And then grants started coming back in, and people are starting to see it. And now we're able to zoom in. We have a new commissioner of prisons who are saying, yeah, we like what you're doing. We see that people are coming in. Like, you have to be strategic about how you're really handling this underserved population. And so we've designed a healing center, educational healing. How can we get you on your feet with substance use disorder, counseling, group therapy, financial literacy, soundboard? We have singing bowls. We have massage therapy. We have restorative justice healing circles. We have culinary art therapy. We have surf safe certification. I could go on and on. We have Everyday Boston Partnership that comes in and brings community to us, formerly incarcerated people, to learn effective communication. We have a theater in the basement for music therapy with Berkeley Music. That's huge. We have another applied theater workshops with Emerson Prison Initiative. That's big. That's the Wang Center. What? We have a partnership with Tufts that allows incarcerated people to get a degree program, but then they have the My Turn program for us formerly incarcerated people that are out here to go into Tufts to get education or prep college. What? Like, we got a lot going on here. There's no way that you could turn away and say nobody could come here. If you're free, come to our program. We're going to give you all we got for you to get on your feet. There's no reason for you to recidivate. There's no reason for you to go cause harm. We want you to understand accountability. The system don't got to hold you accountable and send you to an unnatural, violent environment that's not going to heal you at all. Nobody ever gets healed, but we are continuously healing. And we have a whole podcast studio for when you come from the basement of theater, from the first floor of schooling, from the second floor of healing centers to the third floor. You have a leader now. What you want to talk about? What you want to get into? Our whole podcast system is called Renewed Narratives, Culture, Justice, and Healing. Let's get into some conversations.
One thing that I recognize when looking at your programs and all of your partners is that you've really broadened the set of stakeholders through your partnerships with the higher education institutions in Boston, and with the health-related organizations, as well as those in the arts. So now you have a broad set of people and institutions that are co-invested with you in this, right? And so that not only just appeals to a broader set of people, and gives you more a broader platform for people to learn about your organization, the work that you're doing, but you're less likely to fall down when, for example, parole is trying to jam you up. Can you talk about what what's been your secret sauce in that? Because I looked at all the partnerships and I'm like, dang, like she got,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Berkeley School of Music,
Right.
and I don't know if it was MIT or Harvard, one
Well,
of those.
MIT. MIT is our artist model.
MIT. So I'm
That's
like,
right.
okay,
Well,
sis,
Frank,
like
he comes in
how
and does
yeah.
art therapy. Yeah, we have a mini museum also that you walk into the room and the projector goes off and it shows Brian Stevenson's Legacy Museum. Because we need to understand, we come from slavery to modern day slavery of mass incarceration. Like, how great is that? When you walk in, and you see the art therapy or the work from MIT professor that teaches art therapy, healing. You walk across the room, you see Obama wrote to me back in 2016, his letter about how these are injustices. You look at the wall, you can see Angela Davis's work of abolition movement, or you might see Ruth Gilmore to talk about maybe we should incorporate education
Come on
and
now.
abolition, right? And then the
Come
picture
on.
comes on, and then you're like, wait a minute, what? And then you got to sit down for a minute, listen to Brian Stevenson. So additionally, we have BU students, med students that are coming in monthly to do medical charts, because as formerly incarcerated people, we don't get the right medical health care in a prison environment either. And so there's no trust coming out. You might be dealing with stage 4 colon cancer. You might have heart murmurs or irregular heart beats with medicine that we know that our medical providers are taking psych meds and putting you on methadone or putting you on psych meds with blood pressure medicines that can trip your heart. We don't know, but because we're low income, mass health people that are low insurance providers with a background of incarceration, do you think they care? No, I've had 5
No,
sisters die in the
no.
past 4 years because of lack of in-prison healthcare, lack of in-community healthcare. So we have medical students coming in, developing med charts and knowing how to be empathetic to one's fear, right? And so where does all that come from? It comes from my lived
Yeah.
experience and listening to what our formerly incarcerated people don't have. And so we try to incorporate all of it. We want to give you all you got. We have a boutique up here as well on the 3rd floor to come in. We have Tory Burch shoes that are donated. We have male suits. Listen, we're not playing.
So to get all these partners on board, is it just how do you do it? Is it your story? How do you help find, those points of alignment to get them invested in being a part of what you're doing?
I think it's the universe. I learned how to be a speaker by professors. My particular professor from Cambridge College, Gretchen Moore or Gretchen Shea, she was my writing instructor in 2011, and she brought in the story of Amadou Diallo, if I pronounce his name right. The brother from New York that was shot 41 times. Now, I can read, but I wasn't an avid reader. But when I read his story, my writing was supposed to analyze the reading. I didn't know how to do that because I had a lack of education. So I would always rewrite the story. But in her case, I rewrote a story similar that I understood from a brother that I grew up with, right? Then I started asking her if I could write and do my research on women in correlation of trauma and incarceration. That was going to be my capstone. So when I started writing these stories about people in prison in relation to him, his story, something changed in her mind. Even though she was a writing instructor and had his story, she really didn't know about the harsh punishment of the carceral system. And so she went to administrators at Cambridge College and then got a second job at Boston Conservatory Music and asked if she could do writing for the students in music or create a curriculum, of mass incarceration. So she could start teaching the students of what happens with mass incarceration, which brought in Michelle Alexander's book, right? The New Jim Crow, which brought in some of the videos that I told you about that I was part of with the workshops of what happens with women in incarceration. I had a young man, Raymond Gaines, who I knew that when I was 9, who disappeared when I was 11. And I never knew where he went. We knew him as Paps. He was one of my older brother's friends. And so he was charged with a murder that he didn't commit. And I didn't hear about him again until I got in recovery in 2098. My
And
ex-husband.
in 2008?
98. I wrote
1998. Okay, got
to
you.
Paps and told him I would help him with his case. And I didn't know how I was going to help him. I just knew I was always embedded in the law. And then I relapsed. And then in 2003, I went to visit him and told him I was going to help him again because I got myself together. And then I relapsed. And then in 2016, 17, when I launched New Beginners Reentry Services, I was helping another young man when I told you about participatory defense organizing, 2017, 18, 19. I was speaking at the parole board for another young man, William Goforth, whom I always call my little brother, who was coming out on second degree life parole. And I asked him, where's Paps? And he said, oh, Paps is right here in Norfolk Prison with me. And I said, put him on the phone. And I told him then I was stable. I'm free. I'm ready. And so he sent me all his paperwork. And for 4 years in my backyard, me and the other sisters with Families for Justice Healing dived in his case and got him a lawyer. Went to Innocent Project, Lisa Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Told the story. She looked it up, sent him a lawyer. That lawyer brought him home in 2020.
What?
After 47 years wrongfully convicted. So it was only right. We were able to bring home Stephen Pina after 28 years because I'm always screaming about these disproportionately sentences, these police corruption cases, these interconnected Boston police officers that been the same corruption for decades. It's on almost 12 cases of wrongful convictions.
That's incredible.
We have to let people out. I mean, it's time. And we have the resources to help them.
I know exactly what you mean. It's so inspirational, all the work that you're doing.
Even if one brother got on 2 weeks ago and said, no, sis, I'm doing a double life. I ain't coming home. I said, wait, what? You don't see what's happening?
Yeah.
You don't see all the bills that are, you don't see that you guys are now getting on Zoom to testify in front of legislation? We're changing stuff. I don't want to hear that language. We done brought brothers home. We done changed. We have the Mattis law that says anyone that served that type of transgression of a natural life now has the opportunity, if you were 18, 19, 20, 21, because of the brain development. That law changed in Boston. You're able to come home now on parole. And now we have bills that are looking at ending LWOP, looking at joint venture.
Without parole. Wow.
So, yeah, we got brothers that are getting in front of on Zoom, testifying themselves in front of the judiciary committees. We ain't playing in Boston.
What is, just as a leader, and this is my last question for you, what would you say is like, how are you maintaining your pursuit of what's next?
You know, that's a good question, Jordan, because we have so many organizations out here for formerly incarcerated people that developed that it's really time to create an ecosystem. It's really time for all of us to come together as a board or as an advisory board to really look at what does this infrastructure look like? Because there's no need to keep recreating the wheel. I'm doing this, you're doing this. We have, stipend incentives. We don't want to be competitive. We don't need to be competitive. Yeah. Let's keep growing and building, but we got to build together. We have to come in almost what my mentor, Andrea James, says, like people assembly. Create a whole town hall for all of our organizing or organizations to say to the state, to say to the government, we need funding. We need to be able to now bring in the better educational structure, the better youth development programs, because if we are able to do what we're doing to lessen recidivism in emerging adults, how are we going to stop our children from going into these penitentiaries? How are we going to stop these children from sitting in these DYS centers that are jails? How can we help our mothers be provided the necessities they need to survive themselves with raising their young people? And so the next step is really, we just wrote a grant to hope that we could have a support system for parents, families that don't understand substance use or incarceration, why their children do what they've done, or why they're separated, so they can get on board. And so this could be a ripple effect of growing why we continue to, build a camaraderie with, We Are Better Together Foundation, or Exoneree Network, or Transformational Prison Project, or Families for Justice is
Okay.
Healing,
Yeah.
Justice for Healing. I mean, we have all these Access Mass. Every single one of these organizations. Yard Time, Joseph Bennett, who's badass, who was wrongfully convicted and just got exonerated. But the 4 years he's been out, he created a mental health group for Black men. Started with 3. There's about 30 or 40 of them. And he has bowling, competitiveness for them to get involved and stay, fun and active and together. Overcoming, making connections of, ain't no more fighting. We're not fighting with that group and that group. This is all mentorship for our kids to see. So this is all in our community. But you won't be able to see it if the state continues to take the credit that crime is down because of police departments, or crime is down because the city of Boston is doing the work. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's because we're out here. We're connected to our Muslim communities that mosques are getting down with us. They just opened up Torchlight Recovery Center. They're doing recovery now. Like, things are changing. And we're all in the Black and brown community. So that's what I envision for our future. We have a reentry summit of leaders who aren't directly impacted, but indirectly impacted by the criminal legal system or substance abuse, that brings together formerly incarcerated people. They do it every year. It's an all-day event, breakout rooms, panel discussions. They bring in our Senate, some of our senator leaders, city council members, our state representatives are all starting to be on board with these, changes that we're trying to implement with the law, as to how we got Mattis law changed, as to how we're looking at how to change LWOP. I don't know if that would ever pass, but we definitely should be passing joint venture. I mean, you can't, some of our laws that says if you cause a murder transgression and there's 2 or 3 or 4, and one took a plea, that might have been the shooter or the stabber, and then he's out, and then the rest of them are serving natural life sentence who never even, come on, these are old draconian laws. And so we have people on board. We're all connected. Senator Eldridge knows me personally, which is an honor to me, because I never thought I could know a senator. Well, these are all human beings. These are all human beings. We're all human beings. Everybody's due to error. Everybody hadn't been caught yet. And we don't have to have that act to have to be caught. We could have some good, sound healing places. We develop healing centers in our community. We could change probation names to, I don't know, coaches or healing chiefs, right? We could change the whole trajectory of these offices and make them look like, put pictures up like we have. Like, take pictures of someone who was just successful and graduated because that was your probationee. Now you can call them a successor or something. I mean, just change names of stuff.
I love the vision. Yeah,
Let's
the
change
vision.
the
We got the
language.
vision. We got the power, and you laying it on me right now, because you're absolutely right. We do have, and things are changing, and there's a lot of people that are doing work just like you're doing too, right? And really trying to help heal these wounds and allow people to see their own leadership and access that portal of self-determination to change themselves and their communities. And that's what I think I see your work is all about, and why I love it so much. So I want to respect your time and just thank you for really an incredible conversation today.
Thank you, George.
I learned so much. I'm so inspired and humbled by everything that you're doing. So thank you, Stacey.
Thank
Really
you so
appreciate
much.
it.
I'm so grateful to you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to How to Build a Nonprofit. If you liked the episode, check out the show notes for a link to donate to our guest organization and give us a rave review while you're at it. Feel free to leave comments and questions on your app about what intrigued you most. If you have any suggestions for future guests, email us at howtobuildanonprofit@gmail.com.